I'm Christopher Clark, Cambridge historian. I was born in Australia. For Europeans, that's practically the other end of the world. But the European continent and its incredible diversity always fascinated me. Even in the far-off country where I grew up, I was always aware that so much of our world has its roots in Europe. And modern Europe is one of the greatest achievements in human history. I want to share the grand saga of this continent, and in the process, I hope to rediscover its wonders for myself. This doesn't look European at all, you might say. But there's also an Oriental Europe, and that's what I'm looking for here in Istanbul. Istanbul is the only major city in the world that straddles two continents, the European and the Asian, on which I'm standing here, and between them, the Bosphorus, one of the world's most strategically sensitive waterways. The geography is straightforward enough, but where Europe begins and where it ends is also a question of religion. Today it's fashionable to define Europe in terms of a Western Judeo-Christian tradition, and yet the origins of this tradition lie outside Europe, in the Middle East, in Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. And Paul, the most important of the early Christian missionaries, came from Tarsus in today's Turkey. And this place too, Constantinople, today Istanbul, once shaped the Christian culture of Europe. I'm in Istanbul in the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom that has stood on this spot for 1,500 years. Before the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, this was the largest Christian church in the world, and Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the cultural heart of Europe. When the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453, the Hagia Sophia became a mosque. But the 11th century mosaics still remain as a testimony to the era of Christendom. Today, this building is mainly a museum, although parts of it are once again in use as a mosque. In this place, we can clearly see how similar these religions actually are and which sources they draw from. Nowhere else were the power of the Roman emperors and the authority of the Christian church as tightly intertwined as in this immense structure. When the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453, Sultan Mehmet II marked the victory by riding into the church and conducting the Muslim Friday prayer. The Hagia Sophia became a mosque, and it remained one until 1935, when it was redesignated as a museum. But today, things are changing. The call to prayer of the Muezzin again rings out from the four minarets, and an imam has recently been appointed. Important historical buildings like this one have always been put to political use, and that instrumentalization continues today. The central themes of the Mosaic Bible and the Christian New Testament can nearly all be traced back to sources in Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, and the Levant. Moses' 10 Commandments, for example, probably have their origins in ethical injunctions he encountered in Egypt. And the notion that the soul is immortal and that a divine judgment awaits the dead could also be found in the kingdom of the pharaohs. Christianity, that central strand of the continent's history, was not a European invention. What gave Christianity the power to unite Europe over and over again? Part of the answer can be found in the New Testament, in the book known as Apostles. Having once himself mercilessly persecuted the Christians, Paul, a Greek Jew from Tarsus, becomes a fervent believer in the teachings of Christ. Forgiveness and benevolence are the key to the kingdom of heaven, he preaches, just as Jesus revealed. He presses against the prevailing mentality of the time. He favors forgiveness over condemnation, mercy over revenge. His message is that God is there for everyone, even the poor and downtrodden, and Paul practices what he preaches. On his journeys, he leads by example, standing up for the weak. Paul travelled many thousands of kilometres on roads like these, or more often on rough terrain, or even by boat. And in the process, he laid the foundations for a global church, because Paul's Christianity was an offer to everyone. Initially, to be sure, it was above all the poor and the weak who responded to his call. But the brothers and sisters in the faith stuck together. Some were even prepared to die for their religion, an act of witness that was not lost on all of their contemporaries. What began as a movement of underdogs is today, with 2.3 billion members, the largest faith community in the world. But the rise of Christianity doesn't begin in Jerusalem. It starts in York, England. This is where Constantine the Great is named Roman Emperor in the year 306, or rather Quarter Emperor. At this point, the empire is divided up between 4 emperors. They don't rule from Rome, but from modern-day Milan, Trier, Sirmium, and Izmit. Why is it Constantine, of all people, who helps Christianity become an established major religion?
Where is my mother?
Over there, my lord.
Behind every powerful man is a strong woman, they used to say, and in such cases, a mother can be especially influential. Helena, Constantine's mother, is a fine example. While Constantine primarily views Christianity as a means to power, Helena is baptized. She is a true believer in the superiority of the Christian God. It is likely Constantine's mother who familiarizes the emperor with the new religion, ushering in a new era for Europe. She would later be canonized by the church. And then, before a decisive battle, legend has it that Constantine receives a vision. God tells him that he should go into battle marked with the sign of Christ, that it will help him defeat his enemies. At the time, Constantine was anything but a conventional Christian. It isn't until many years later, just before his death, that he resolves to be baptized. But Constantine extends his autocratic rule under the banner of Christianity, and the Christogram becomes his trademark. His struggle for power is the first religious war, the first crusade, and the beginning of a fateful alliance between the church and the state that will last into Europe's modern era. At the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, as depicted by Renaissance painter Raphael, Constantine I defeats his rival Maxentius to become sole ruler. He believes that God has granted him this victory, and in gratitude, he launches the process of Christianizing the Roman Empire. Constantine celebrates his victory over his rivals with a triumphal procession in the year 312. Like Caesar, who saw himself as a demigod, Constantine parades towards the Temple of Jupiter, but under a Christian banner. However, unlike his hero, Constantine symbolically turns around when he's halfway to the temple.
Halt! Turn around.
But, my emperor.
Turn around. Now.
The crowd isn't expecting this, and they boo him as he rides away. It's a good visual representation of what would come to be called the Constantinian shift. Christianity is becoming more and more influential, and half a century later, it will become the official religion. But what were the reasons for the success of Christianity? Well, first there's the fact that the alliance of the church with the powerful Roman imperial state greatly increased its appeal. The church was open to anyone who wanted to join. This had never been the case with the Jews. Then there was the Christian belief in deliverance and salvation in the hereafter. Death was no longer final. For those who had endured a great deal of suffering in their lives, this was a powerful and attractive argument. It seemed that what Jesus had promised them was something the many heathen gods they had worshipped up till now simply couldn't offer. The Christian church could even forgive sins in the name of Jesus, something that would have seemed very strange to the Apostle Paul. According to the old Jewish tradition, the forgiveness of sins was something reserved to God and the Last Judgment. The emperor commissions the construction of the Arch of Constantine in Rome to mark this major victory. It's a symbol of his claim to power. Constantine adorned his claim to power with Christian symbols, portraying the events and decisions of his reign as expressions of God's will. It's an invincible combination. We can see here the roots of the religiously sanctioned violence that in later centuries would scar the history of Europe and its global expansion. In the year 324, Constantine the Great turns his back on Rome forever. He heads to the Bosporus, to Byzantium, where he constructs his new capital, Constantinople, today known as Istanbul. It becomes the center of Christian culture, outshining even Rome. Where today the skyline is dominated by minarets, Constantine and his successors built churches. He wanted Christ Pantocrator, ruler of the world, to radiate from this city to the rest of Europe, as the mosaics and paintings in the Chora Church indicate. Back then, the actual heart of Christendom was not in Rome, but in the east of Europe. But what became of Rome, that eternal city where everything supposedly began, ravaged by the raids of Germanic tribes from the 5th century onwards? And Rome, the former world metropolis, fell into decline and decay. Ruins everywhere. What didn't decline with ancient Rome was Roman Christianity. The Germanic tribal leaders accepted and adopted the faith, albeit in a somewhat simplified form. And so the Germans in Rome became Roman Christians and thereby heirs to the Roman imperial heritage. A profound rupture and at the same time a deep continuity. In the history of Europe, this is not a contradiction. And at the other end of the continent, far to the west, it's Ireland, of all places, that Emerald Isle at the outer edge of Europe, never conquered by the Romans, that becomes one of the most important starting points for the process of Christianization. Irish missionaries begin to find their way into other countries as early as the 6th century. But why does it all start in Ireland? Here in Ireland is where Christianity and the nature-worshipping faith of the Celts meet. The Book of Kells, a true treasure of the Middle Ages, is a good example of the way these two religions crossed paths. Filled with images of nature, it blends traditional Celtic motifs with Christian symbols. It was this distinctive mix, the simplicity and the credibility of a religion that had not yet drifted too far from its heathen roots, that gave Irish Christianity its special appeal. And Irish monasteries were special in another aspect as well. They were open to young people who wished to study without necessarily becoming monks or nuns. And this open traffic between the cloister and the world beyond was another important feature of early Irish Christianity. It all starts in the 4th century with a monk named Patrick, the son of a Roman officer from Britannia. He is considered the apostle of Ireland. At the time, Ireland is still a land of druids and pagans. According to legend, Patrick starts a fire on the hill of Slane at Easter in the year 433. The fire is larger and burns longer than the one set by his pagan opponents on the hill of Tara, an ancient Celtic ritual site across the valley. And that is Patrick's strategy in a nutshell. Ireland's patron saint wins people over with simple signs and symbols, feeding their spiritual hunger and helping them become devout Christians. He explained the Trinity, for example, with the help of a clover leaf. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Today, the clover leaf is the national symbol of the Irish, an icon like St. Patrick himself. Monasteries like Clonmacnoise served as an incubator for this fledgling religious faith in Ireland. St. Patrick was clever enough not to contradict the prevailing social order or act against the clans in the country. He imported the Roman alphabet and helped to ensure that the Celtic traditions were recorded in writing. In order to understand the expansiveness of Irish religion, the scope of its influence across Western Europe, we need to remember another peculiarity of the Irish monks, namely the peregrinatio pro Christo, the pilgrimage for Christ, which was not a journey to a specific sacred location, but a protracted exile of wandering, in which the monks took upon themselves the risks and privations of early medieval travel as a kind of penance, a form of martyrdom. Far from their beloved country, their language, and their kinship groups, a form of ascetic piety without which the course of the spread of Christianity in Europe might have been very different. In the 6th century, the monks Columbanus and Gallus gathered 10 of their religious brothers around them in remembrance of the 12 apostles. The walking stick, the symbol of pilgrims, becomes their trademark. They set out to convert their European neighbours on the continent. For them, all of life is a pilgrimage.